This week, I'm joined by Seth Epstein, the founder and chief catalyst of SocialStay. We'll talk about the future of your hotel stay and how mobile will change that, and about his career as a creative entrepreneur. Stick around. Welcome to episode numero 13. I am your host, Jose Caballero, co-founder and chief creative officer of digital agency The Group. Every week, you ask us business, creative, tech, and marketing questions, and myself and our guest experts answer your web design questions. There's 5 ways you can reach us. You can ask us live right now via Ustream at ustream.tv/thisweekin. You can also ask us via YouTube at youtube.com/thisweekin, and via Twitter using the hashtag TWIWebDesign. You can tweet me directly at Jose Caballero, and please subscribe to our show on iTunes. If you like it, rate it. Give us a star or 2. Actually, 5 stars would be great. Joining us today again is our guest expert and freelance creative director, Ari Guimon. Ari has worked for such clients as Diversa City Search, Disney, Deutsche Bank, UCLA, and many more. And in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing the second installment of Web Design 101. It's going to be Web Design 102, the intermediate edition, so please join us for that in a few weeks. I'm really excited about our guest. He is an amazing entrepreneur and a creative entrepreneur at that. I actually looked up for the LinkedIn reviews, and to introduce him, I'm going to read a few of those, or actually one of them. So, a background, Seth is a creative entrepreneur with Unbound Energy. In the mid-90s, he started Fuel, a broadcast design firm here in Los Angeles, which he then sold to Razorfish in 1999. Since, he has founded multiple companies, including the AVM and SocialStay, which we're going to be talking about today, the #1 platform for hospitality, changing your hotel stay. And people can create and deploy their own social apps. Hotels can do that. To illustrate a little bit about Seth, let me read one of the brief review from his LinkedIn. I had the pleasure of working with Seth as executive producer at Fuel and found him to be a tireless, inspired leader who was able to work in a special kind of magic that I have seen little of in other people. While working with Seth, he was able to transform his graphics shop into a world-class company with Fortune 100 clientele in 18 months and other tremendous accomplishments. Welcome, Seth.
Thanks. Thank you.
You know, I want to get started right away in the first few minutes of today's interview, talking about your background, like how you got started and what it took in the mid-90s, at the beginning, at the infancy of this transition into digital, into computers. You were able to take advantage of that and grow what was a pretty awesome company. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, it's interesting we're in this building because this is one of the first, this complex of offices. I worked for a company called Troon as a freelancer in this very complex.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so one of the first triggers that got me to start Fuel was that I was freelancing for them, and I was like, man, I could do it better than these guys. I just didn't feel they had the standards and the commitment to beautiful design. They just wanted to pump stuff out. And the Macintosh was just starting to become something, and through a freak meeting, I saw a prototype of the Radius Video Vision card, which was the way you got theoretically full screen video in. At that time, it was 640, 480, and that you could lay graphics on. And there was a guy named Flavio Campa who was doing some cool graphics, and I just happened to see it, and in the instant I saw it, I said, "That's my future." And that was I made a commitment, and that's what I had to sort out from there. So I really knew nothing or very little about business. I had a jeans company in college. I went to UC Santa Barbara, and then I had a denim company, and ended up losing $25,000 and that company failing. So I came out of that really pissed off, and I wanted to prove that I could build a world-class company. And that really was the engine that drove Fuel.
And Fuel, for those of you who are web focused, if you see any graphics on TV, you guys did the X Games. You did even the package today,
Sports
I think,
Center, yeah.
for Sports Center. Every time I see it, I'm like, oh, that reminds me of Fuel. You guys did a lot of really interesting work and a lot of big work, and you were also the parent of a lot of LA's broadcast design studios. Everything from Brandon School, Stardust, all those guys started with you at Fuel. So in a way, you're like the granddaddy. And one of the stories that I find interesting that you and I shared a while ago, there was a big company called Pittard Sullivan. They were like Pittard Sullivan.
Yeah.
They were the big agency. They were like, they had a huge behemoth building in Culver City.
Yeah.
And tell us the story of what you did to recruit from them. This is an awesome story.
Yeah, we figured we were growing and we had this appetite. You know, it was like when you eat more than you can chew kind of a thing. That's kind of how we built the company. You know, it's like, that looks good, let's go for it. So we felt like we needed to, we at the time we thought we needed to recruit and that we need to get the top talent, and they had the top talent. So we hired a lunch truck, a taco truck. At that time there was no, gourmet trucks. So we just got a standard taco truck and had fuel stickers and had it pull up in front of them and honk the horn and say free lunch on fuel.
That's funny.
And stickered I think it was the night before, the night after, we ended up stickering like every sign of when they left work, which way they would leave work. They would see fuel stickers for like miles in every direction. They weren't real happy about that.
I bet. Did it work is a question. Who cares if they were happy or not?
It did. I think it accomplished what it ended up accomplishing is maybe what it didn't intend to accomplish. What it accomplished was that we did speak to different people at Pittard who were interested in leaving. Mm-hmm. But what we learned out of it was that culturally they were at a point of maturity where we weren't. So we were younger, scrappier, we couldn't afford to pay what they could pay, and we had senior people, or what occurred to us as senior people at the time, coming to us saying, hey, I want 110 grand, that's what I make at Pittard, and hey, I need this title and I need this. And I'd look at their portfolio and I'd look at some of the kids coming out of school and I couldn't understand the gap. And we were, fuel was a very, very, it's grassroots.
But I like that because a lot of people ask us the question, and Ari and I were talking about this, earlier in the day about the issue of
meritocracy.
Well, not just meritocracy, of the transfer from freelance into being, an agency or to having more people, mm-hmm. and it's a good subject that I want us to cover a little bit as we go through. But the transition from this time from fuel, and that translated into success. It attracted, Razorfish in New York, mm-hmm. which was expanding into LA, wanted to expand into motion graphics. Jeff Dotches, who was a guest 4 or 5 shows ago, mm-hmm. acquired fuel. How was that just in terms of, as a creative, having built a great brand in a particular segment, getting acquired by a bigger company? How did that feel?
Yeah, it's pretty surreal. I mean, I think the best way, it was pretty surreal. I mean, the way it happened, the story goes that I noticed that Razorfish was doing something in motion graphics. It came up across the radar. And at that time, for about a year, we'd been really working hard on structuring the business properly for growth and scale and really being able to grow. We had about, maybe at that time, 35, 40 people, I don't remember. But I had an advisor who was working with me on growing the company. And when I saw that thing about Razorfish, and it may have been my wife Monica, I can't remember who it was, but said, hey, you should reach out and call, actually I think it was Monica who said, you should reach out and call them, see what's going on. So I called Vanessa, who used to work for me, now works at Blind. I reached out to Razorfish, and we just started having some very informal conversations. Richard Titus and I had lunch and just started shooting the breeze, yeah. And he said, hey, send me over, where are you guys at in terms of revenue? Where are you guys at in terms of customers? Send me over your client list. Send me over your reel. And he said, hey, I think, I'd like to know a little bit more. So that sort of preliminary process resulted in Craig Canerick coming out to LA, and we sat down and had sushi and just talked. And in the middle of dinner, he said, hey, I think we want to buy your company. Wow. And that was
amazing.
And that was history, and that's how I ended up in LA. Actually, I was in New York, and they sent me out here to. I don't know what they sent me out here for, but so.
Actually, you do.
Well, I knew the culture, I knew the people. It was a bit of a battlefield situation. Mm-hmm. They needed a creative director in LA, and they sent me because I was doing a good job at doing that. So that was, and it was a lot of fun, and I think it was a very historically it's a great time. But to our audience specifically, and somebody wants to know Duraco, how much was it bought for? Is that okay to share with?
Yeah, it's public knowledge. You can look it up. It was sold for $31 million.
So Duraco, the answer to your question is $31 million. And again, it's multiple of the revenue at the time, which was probably in the 10, 15 million.
Yeah, our revenue was 12.
I'm curious how you felt about the offer? Like, was it something that you were immediately open to, or was it kind of like scary, like I don't want to let go just yet?
That's a good question. Well, a few things is as wild as it sounds, I didn't know you built companies to sell them. I really didn't know I had no idea that companies would be bought. It really was.
I'm surprised at that, by the way.
No, but it was in the last year that I started to realize that did happen. But when I first started Fuel, I didn't know you built companies to sell them, like as a strategy. I just wanted to build a world-class company that could show that I was a great entrepreneur. I was so pissed off about having failed with the Gene company that I really wanted to prove that I could build a great company. So that's what I wanted. So later in the company, as it started to grow, I had gotten an offer from a guy who's fairly well known, but he lowballed it. He's like, I'll buy it for $1 million. And then that sort of woke me up to, wait a minute, you can sell a company. To your question, Ari, when the whole thing went down, I was looking to figure out where to scale next. We had sort of reached this plateau, and we would either go to the next level or expand into web, or we were looking. So I was sort of measuring the environment. When Razorfish came along, when that conversation came along, I was curious. And when the phone conversation I had with Jeff Datchis about the numbers, it was really a no-brainer. It was really a no-brainer. The number was big. And it was a big number, so it was.
So it was an easy enough decision, in terms of whether or not you were attached to it. But I think that it brings up a really good question, Ari, and it's a good segue into talking about the transition into web and talking about the obstacles that you have to overcome. And I'll start with this: that from my experience and with what I know, my interactions with you, and what I see is that you are able to, despite of not knowing sometimes, or the fear that comes from that, to act and to move forward, and there's momentum. Next week we're going to have Scott Belsky from Behance, and we're going to talk about the idea of action and taking actions and stuff forward. Mm-hmm. And fear is sometimes what stops you. You said something earlier, the advisors. You had advisors. Mm-hmm. Do you still have advisors today advising you through the process?
Oh yeah, I'm a huge proponent, more than ever.
How do you ask someone? I'm a freelancer. Keep in mind, when I was starting the group as a collective, I asked for advisors. You know who I asked? Jeff Datchis, Craig Kanarick, the guys that I had worked for. Yeah. They told me everything. Yeah. It's like, here's how to do the business, bam, 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 and they cared about your success. How do you go about? How would you tell one of our viewers to go about with that process?
Well, I think there's when it comes to advisors, you got to think of them in two ways. There's advisors that people choose because of their name and their status, and it looks good on their board. And then there's advisors that actually are getting their hands dirty, right? Who are weekly, day-to-day. So my weekly, day-to-day advisor is a guy named Lex Sisney, who founded Commission Junction, which is a pretty big, one of the world's biggest affiliate platforms. And Lex, as a career now, is a coach. So for me, on a weekly basis, we're working through, all right, where's their friction? What's in the way? Where are the opportunities? Where do we need to be focused?
So they help you see. So an advisor helps you see. Like, you identify the obstacle, and they say, you know what, here's how I've overcome this obstacle. What do you think about how to do it this way?
Well, not so much, interestingly enough. I actually think Lex's style is much more listening. First, I think we call it emptying the cup. It's like, all right, let me hear everything you've got. What do you got? So what's going on this week? And so I actually can sort of air out, like, I'm really struggling with this issue. I'm frustrated by this. I don't know what to do here. And I just air it out. And then what he does is he repeats back what he just hears, what he heard from me. So I feel like I'm fully heard. And then he'll go, okay, well, let's look at these areas. What actions are we going to take there? So what are you going to do related to that? Well, I think I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So he's much more of a reflective coach versus like I'm going to tell you what to do. And so I'm figuring it out on my own versus him giving me any. I mean, he's got an incredible depth of knowledge, but he never says do this. He's really much more like, all right, so what do you see as the right path here? And so then it's a conversation. So I think that's a valuable from a, there's really smart guys out there, and I think that there's some great advice, but.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I learned that from you, or I honed that in from our collaborations, and even this show today helps me a lot to have gone through that. And now my approach with clients is really to empty the cup, quote unquote, stopping everybody on the team from just jumping and saying anything. Let them talk until they're done. And wait, pause, 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 pause. Okay, there's nothing else that they have to empty. And then really reflect it back to them, because they know you're an expert. They know you can help them do it, but it's not about it. It's really about all the obstacles around it that they need to overcome to do it. And designers are really trained to do it. They're trained to do the craft. So it's hard for us to do that specifically. And there's another question from Durocoil. Thank you, Durocoil. Advisors only in the same space, or does that include also things like PR and other functions of the company? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that, you can have multiple advisors. And let me say it this way. There's advisors you have that you rely on either weekly, monthly, or
on a regular scheduled basis.
There are those, and there's infrequent. The other way to look at it is that everybody you interact with are advisors, right? So, like, let's say you're going to go hire a PR firm. I'm bringing up PR. Maybe why don't treat it like everybody's an advisor to you and wants to help you get where you want to go.
Get their input.
Because you know what? I found people authentically, by their very nature, want to give and support. It takes a very strange person, in my opinion, and they're probably not a good fit to hang out with, if they don't have something to give. People really want to give. So I think that if you treat, like, right now we're interviewing PR firms out of New York and LA for SocialStay.
I have a good one for you in San Francisco.
Okay, good. We'll talk to them.
Launch Squad.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay, I'd like to talk to them.
But you were saying, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, it's just that everybody has a lot to give you. Somebody in PR is going to have insight. There's no way that any of us could have, or in, let's say, Rails development, that we're not going to necessarily have that insight. So the ability to work with both your team, work with clients, and that it's going back to your point, it's a way of listening and realizing that everybody has a lot to contribute. A simple example would be, this last week I had a call with a potential client, a huge hotel, and they already are working on a mobile solution. And so I just switched the gear and treated them almost like an advisor to me. Like, great, so what are you finding? What are you learning? What are things that would be helpful to us? And let me share about our plan. And just open conversation. And there was just one piece of advice he gave me that is going to literally change the direction of our business. I mean, huge.
That's invaluable. Those little nuggets that you find between the lines if you just shut up and listen, to be very crass. It brings up the point for transition about SocialStay. What is SocialStay?
So SocialStay solves the problem for hospitality and venues. What the hell do we do about mobile? Okay, so if you go into the head of marketing or head of sales and marketing, or you go into any, from tiny boutique up to the largest hotel chains globally, they all know that this
but
trend
they need to
of
do something.
Right,
social
buzzwords.
Can
social,
we bring it up,
mobile, Ari, can you bring it up on your screen? I want to see it a little bit. So keep on going.
Yeah, so I think there's this problem that they all need to solve, and so what we've done is we've created this platform that allows hotels to not only scroll down, not only allows them to have a mobile application on Android, Apple, BlackBerry, etc., but it gives them total control of their platform. So it's customized, they can control it, they can update it, they can do push messaging, they can do working on a messaging, two-way messaging platform. I mean, it's just a robust tool, because if you think of it like this, it's like the hotel in their pocket, and it is the primary device that people use, period. And if you look at the statistics, I wish I had brought that deck. There's a baby born every, I think there's either 4 babies born every second, and there's 15 new mobile phones put into activation every second.
Wow.
So mobile is...
There's more mobile phones than people being born.
It is mobile is by far the most commonly used technology on the planet. So it is what you're going to use when you go anywhere. And so we're working on it being a much more intuitive, wiser, supportive, what you want when you're there.
So you're bringing to some degree the simplicity and the in some degrees, a design thinking to it. It's like the
Exactly.
ability to really make it beautiful. You say the word beautiful a lot, and how do we make something beautiful? How do we make, and Gerardo Ricci, that was an invaluable piece of advice. Thank you. He's thanking you, Seth, for the advice. Likewise, that was awesome. In terms of SocialStay and what I'm very curious about for you, you're coming from motion, you're coming from creative, suddenly you're doing a tech company, it's a big transition. There's a lot of people out there that are creative, that are scared, S-less. You can say, I can use the S word on this, even though I'll avoid it, so our sponsors, like Hover, which I'll talk about in a minute.
I'll beep.
Yeah, you can beep it for me, beep! And actually, we don't have the balls anymore when I say actually, we'll have that soon.
I'll just throw water.
You can throw water at me every time I say actually. What were the biggest obstacles? Like breakdowns? What got fucked up in that transition between motion and something had to break?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Lots broke.
And how did you deal with it in a few in a minute?
Yeah,
in less than a
in
minute.
a condensed format. Well, I think the question is really like, how do you go from being a highly creative entrepreneur to building like a serious world-class business with investors and advisors and building a world-class team? There is no you can't do anything, but really it comes down to if you're solving a problem, that's really where you start. Because if you're solving a problem, you need that ingredient. So in the case of design, if I'm a freelancer and I'm a really good designer and people need web design, a lot of the stuff's going to fill in around it. In our case, when we're building a mobile platform, if we're solving a really clear problem for our clients, then a lot of stuff's going to fill in around it. But I think the question of how to go from being a highly creative entrepreneur to a good business person might be an entire show.
We should do that.
But it really comes down to, from my perspective, you've got to be willing to probably read a lot, do a lot of self-exploration, do courses, talk to a lot of people, try to be both as malleable as you can, and then also when it's time, you really do have to put the mind you have to quiet the mind as much as you can, or shut it up, if you will.
And that's an interesting. So the idea of malleability and it's a. So for me, one of the things that being open to people, being open to having influences around you, and listening and learning new things, without having this like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to change because I'm afraid of doing anything differently because it might not work and it might be painful. I'm pretty resilient, and I'll take all the risks needed or necessary risk. But that ability to allow other people in and allow input. Even this show is happening because of that. You were the one who told me at some point in a very small comment offhand during an event, you should be in education. And I said, oh, you know what? That's what, since every opportunity that comes in front of me, I actually take it relative to that way of thinking. So Gerardo and some of the other people that are watching, that have been watching this show, Seth is a reason why this show is probably happening in terms of manifesting that direction in my life. And talking about how do you get those skills, group school is something that is pretty near and dear to my heart, as I was saying, in education. And there's a workshop coming up on the end of this month, April the 30th and May 1st. If you go to groupschool.net, you can find out more details. And we're teaching our user experience process, which you started becoming familiar with. How do you define your users? How do you define your product? How do you do, creative briefs? How do you do a lot of the things that some of you have potentially seen? If you've watched the previous shows where Ari and I went through some of the steps, you saw a little bit of, but imagine having a weekend, a Saturday and a Sunday that you can spend with us. And a lot of people are going to say, well, it's expensive, it's $7.99, I can't afford that right now. And whether you're a creative, whether you're a freelancer, whether you're an executive, it could be a cost. And I'm going to do something special for our viewers, or TWI web design as a code. So TWI web design. If you go to groupschool.net and you sign up for the first workshop, you should come to the workship actually.
Cool.
Just or send some of your people to do it. We can do some type of deal because it's going to be pretty cool. Producers, people who might, if you're an ad agency, if you're a motion graphics firm and you want to get into doing and consulting, here you have me and a group of experts that I've been doing web consulting for 15 years, and you're going to have a whole weekend of exercises, and it's hella fun. You've gone to events and helped produce events, for group school. Were they fun?
Yeah, they're a ton of fun.
They're a ton of fun, and these are going to be extremely valuable. So again, go to groupschool.net, and sign up. It's $3.99. So it's instead of $7.99, you're going to get it for, that's 60%. I don't know the math on that. 57% off to go to Group School. Take advantage of that opportunity, and I'd love to see you there. It's going to be a lot of fun. So,
what are the dates on that?
It's going to be the end of this month, April 30th and May 1st. So it's Saturday and Sunday of the end of the month. So to wrap up in terms of talking about, I'd like to tangibly help some of our viewers. And there's a viewer last week that asked this idea of, I'm trying to expand as a freelancer, and I'm trying to grow a team. How do I do it? You know, how do I find people? How do I interact? And Ari, you're going through the same thing. And
I think that's actually really interesting. We were talking about it before the show. Like, one question I would have is like, when, and maybe you had this when you were first scaling Fuel. How do you go about choosing a good collaborator? Like, how do you identify them? Like, is there a certain profile that they have to fit, or?
It's a good question. Well, yeah, I think that you know, sometimes, you know, you can definitely get lucky by gut, you know, and just a good fit, you know, just like, wow, that guy kind of compliments me in what he does, you know, so that works. It's worked plenty of times. I mean, the Beatles.
Intuition is not dead. You can actually have some intuitive sense of who might work and who might not.
Right.
But you have to try out a lot of people, like in small steps. Like, hey, let's do this together, or let's hang out together. Or
yeah, I agree. I think that there's different styles. Look, creative people by their very nature are not going to sit there and go through a 12-point inspection plan and analyze the right person to hire. You're going to, my experience, and particularly in the beginning, was it was much more on gut. What I would say generally, if I were to say one secret for creative people, what is that number one person that they need that's going to help them grow and scale? It's without a question what I would call a producer, or a producer type energy. That's somebody who doesn't want to do the creative. They don't want to sit in front of a computer till 12 at night. They want to talk to clients, organize things, keep them in a row, bill the clients, keep you on track, and that energy for a designer is the number one ingredient for growth.
Right. That's an awesome piece of advice. And Ari, I know that's exactly the next step that you need to take.
Right.
Here's my experience. My partner in starting the group was that person. That she was someone who was more of a producer and could organize and knew me and knew how creative I was, quote unquote, and was able to harness that and organize and talk to our clients and do a lot of the contracts and billing and all that kind of stuff. And that allowed us to get to a point where we can hire producers and then move on from there. So I found that partner. And then one of the things I see today, and to plug one of our media sponsors, AIGA LA, I'm on the board of AIGA LA. A lot of the people who volunteer for that are either creative or not. Some people are not creative. Some people are producers, or they're people that are interested in design but are not necessarily designers, who are like that. And you see them actually doing the different tasks. And during that, you can identify, okay, that person is great. Hey, do you want to work on a project with me? Even if it's freelance and you kind of budget it out. Identifying it comes from really having
just talking to people
getting in
too.
front of it.
I mean, amazingly, I think it's pretty incredible what you can do with the web. So, I would say post it on Facebook, post it on Craigslist. I mean, I found great people on Craigslist in every area. So, and the other thing I would say that in terms for freelancers is the question that's coming, well, how do I pay that person? Like, I find somebody who's great, but how do I pay that person? And the way that I've done it and I've found valuable is I say, okay, well, I'm going to take a certain percent of the budget. And whatever the budget is, I'm going to give it to you. And my experience has been producers are anywhere from 7% to 12% of the budget on average. So, in a freelance scenario, if they're going to be carrying a lot of weight, you might say, okay, great, I'm going to give you 10%. Or you might even give them 15%.
Right, depending on how much.
Depending on how many other freelancers you're going to have to bring. You might even give them 20%, 25%. It just depends on how big the budget is, how much margin you have, how much time it's going to take, how much handholding.
Sorry to cut you off, Seth.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking a question about tech skills, and we have a few minutes left. We're at the 29-minute mark. And before we wrap it up, I want to cover a little bit of that. I personally did not have tech skills. The same advice as Seth just gave about meeting people and cutting up the budgets. We reached out to different people in our network that we worked with at Razorfish, and we had them help us out on the projects as developers. That's period. That's how we did it. So if you're a designer and you're thinking, well, I don't have the tech skills to do web design, keep in mind, I've been designing for the web for 15 years. I've never coded a page for a client, even though I've coded pages for myself. I just happen to direct and to harness the people around me that can help do those. So don't be afraid of it. Know the language. Lynda.com I talked about a lot, a way of learning some of the basic skills. for that. And talking about the basic skills and some of the tech stuff, if you don't like tech stuff, I want to kind of reintroduce and talk about Hover, which is one of our sponsors. And I like it when Jason on This Week in Startups goes Hover, 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 or repeats the company. Please check them out. Go to hover.com and enter the promo code WEEK for 10% off. And you can also go to hover.com TWID, hover.com TWID. This helps us to show them that our viewers love them. So you guys out there, please, in exchange for some of the great advice, thank our sponsors for making this possible and paying the bills here at the network. I want to close a little bit by, as a wrap up, if, again, I'm a creative, I like Durocoil, which is a cool name, Durocoil, Gerardo Ricci, etc., and you're going out there and you're beginning to do it. What's probably the most invaluable thing that you've learned in your journey as an entrepreneur, as a creative entrepreneur, that you can pass on to our audience and say, look, if you go forth this way, you will be able to, succeed?
Yeah, well, so as a creative entrepreneur or a designer, because I am a designer ultimately, I think that when it comes down to it, it really comes down to being committed to doing exceptional work. I mean, the number one thing, even SocialStay, any company you build, freelance, client projects, when you do exceptional work, it translates to more exceptional work. It doesn't matter how small the job is, and so I think that commitment to every job you do as being exceptional and really putting the time in to do whatever it takes to be exceptional, I think is critical. There's a lot more to say around that, but really if there was the key ingredient, it's doing beautiful work and sharing it with people, because if people are aware of you, you never know where that lead or that relationship is going to come up, just like Razorfish. I didn't know where that was going to come from, or I don't know that next week I might need a Rails developer, I might need a web designer, I might need a motion designer, I might need, who knows what I need. But when you're doing beautiful work and sharing it, that's how you grow.
I think that's a really good point, like spending time on things that are going to get you visibility as opposed to slapping something together that you're never really going to want to show anybody.
In the beginning, taking less work and doing better work.
Yeah. Better work is better.
Is by far better. And even in SocialStay, we struggle with that too, is, we want to make exceptional and beautiful interfaces, and we've had to slow the company down on purpose. And, it might not be popular. It might not be the popular thing to do.
With your investors, they want you to move fast.
Right.
But that's exceptional advice, and I think that's a really great way. And again, if you guys are hearing that, it's really do your best at what you're focused on and be present to those projects, because every single project is a stepping stone to the next. People sometimes look at the future and they're like, I want to move on to the next thing, I want to move on to the next thing. Stop yourself, slow yourself, be patient, do a great job on what you have today, and enjoy that experience of that project right now. If you're not enjoying it, then you're doing the wrong project. You should stop doing it.
Doing the wrong work, actually.
It shouldn't work. And I thank you for that. I really appreciate that, Seth. I know you're super busy. You're coming down from Santa Barbara, so it's a real pleasure to have you today.
Yeah, thanks.
Next week, folks, we want to continue this conversation with Scott Beltsky about how to get ideas done, creative ideas done. It's going to be a pretty awesome show, and he's dedicated to helping creatives like you and I overcome the obstacles that face us in starting our careers and promoting ourselves. And he's going to talk about the Behance Network. He's going to talk about what's coming up next for the Behance Network. It's a pretty awesome show. I'm really looking forward to having you and answering your questions. Thank you guys for asking questions in the chat room. We will see you guys next week.